Welcome. I'm Philip Pollock. This is the Essentials of Political Analysis. I'd like to discuss the definition and measurement of concepts. There are two large topics, I guess you say main topics in this chapter. One is conceptual definitions, and the other is operational definitions, which has a lot more to do with measurement. In the conceptual definitions part, which I'll cover in this presentation, we're going to talk about how to clarify a concept. We're going to present a template for writing a conceptual definition. Concept. What is a concept? A concept is an idea or mental construct that represents phenomena in the real world. When you use a concept or a conceptual word like democratization or power or ideology or liberalism, you have in mind a concrete attribute that you're thinking about, but you're not necessarily clarifying. That's the challenge in this chapter, is to take conceptual words or conceptual questions that are vague and difficult to answer and substitute those, if you will, with concrete questions that represent conceptual questions. Here are some very common concepts in political science: globalization, power. That's a real thorny one, power. Democratization, political participation, social status, ideology, liberalism, conservatism. Here's a conceptual question. Are women more liberal than men? This question is not answerable as it's framed now, because of course it depends on what we mean by liberalism and conservatism. We can answer this question: are women more likely to support abortion rights than are men? So if by what you mean when you say liberal conservative, you're referring to support or opposition to abortion rights, then indeed we can come up with a measurement of a person's level of support and answer that question. So let's look a little more closely at this problem. The problem of beginning with a conceptual question and transforming it into a concrete question. Clarification. In clarifying a concept and getting at its empirical properties, we need to think of properties or traits, characteristics that are concrete, measurable, and that vary. The vary part is how you can tease out what you mean. I sometimes think of a concept as a sort of a label on a suitcase. Liberalism, conservatism is on a suitcase, and you open up the suitcase, and inside you find all these concrete blocks that are specific empirical properties of liberalism and conservatism, to use that example. It helps in this process, you're sort of brainstorming the empirical properties here. It helps to think of two ideal subjects. And if we're thinking about liberalism, conservatism, for example, with regard to individual people, you would think of two ideal individuals. One who is the perfect liberal, has all the empirical traits you associate with liberalism, and the other, the opposite, an ideal conservative, one who has all of the empirical properties, which are the opposites of liberals that you think of when you think of conservatism. We're going to go through this with an example in the book, and we're going to discuss three kinds of problems that arise to be alert to when you clarify a concept. And here's the example. So think of a liberal, think of an ideal conservative. These are mirror image. And as you brainstorm this list, it's good just to be open and think of everything you can, and then go through the list and remove properties or words or descriptors that do not belong. For example, we might say this. When we think about a liberal, we might think of someone who has lower income. And we might think of a conservative as someone who has higher income. Low income, high income. See, there's the concrete. They do vary. It's a concrete. We can measure income. You might think of a liberal as younger, a conservative as older. So there again, we have something that's eminently measurable and varies. But for reasons we'll review in a moment, both of these traits, income and age, do not belong on a list that when you're trying to clarify the concept of liberalism, conservatism. Now, why is that? The reason is these properties, which might come to mind, might be related to ideology, but it's possible to think about income and age without also thinking about how liberal or conservative a person is. These words refer to entirely different, they're measurements actually of entirely different concepts of income and age. So we're going to remove those from the list here in a minute, but let's look at another problem first. Here are some other ideas that that might arise when you're thinking about liberalism and conservatism. You might say, well, liberal is someone who supports social justice. And then, of course, on the opposite side, a conservative would be someone who opposes social justice. Or you might say, a liberal is someone who opposes the free market. A conservative supports free market principles. Now, these are perfectly good ideas, but they don't belong on the list either. Why is that? Because these are vague conceptual words. Social justice it may be an important concept, but it doesn't here show any empirical properties. It's vague and conceptual. Also, one would say that about supports and opposes the free market. These are vague terms that are themselves concepts, and we can't use one concept to define another. So these two traits, these two words, are going to come off the list too. We'll get back to that in a second. We've already reviewed two problems. Let's continue. A liberal, you might say, supports government-funded health care. A conservative opposes government-funded health care. I don't know. I sort of like this one. I can think of a 7-point scale, supporting government-funded health care at 0.1 and opposing it at 0.7. And you could ask people, where are you on this scale? A perfect liberal would be at 0.1, and an ideal conservative would be at 0.7. Opposes tax cuts, a liberal. Supports tax cuts. Well, I sort of like this one too. We could think about, again, a scale that measures attitudes about taxation, and we could measure a conservative and a liberal and conservative along this scale. Before going on, think about how these two items, which we've just discussed, health care and tax cuts, think about how they're similar to each other. I mean, is it possible that both of these items measure, I guess you might say, a dimension of liberalism, conservatism, say the social welfare dimension? People either support policies that have been on the political agenda since really the New Deal of the 1930s, or oppose those policies. So that's a good place to kind of begin. Let's add some more attributes here, though. I think of a liberal as someone who opposes restrictions on abortion. A conservative supports those restrictions. A liberal supports same-sex marriage. A conservative opposes same-sex marriage. Now, these are interesting. I like these too. It seems to me like a very rich portrait of a liberal and conservative can be painted by adding these items there, opposes restrictions on abortion and the attitudes on same-sex marriage. Again, think about how these two items, abortion and same-sex marriage attitudes, are similar to each other. Don't these sorts of attitudes represent, I guess you might say, cultural or newer social issues that came onto the political agenda in the 60s and 70s? In this way, they're somewhat different than the economic and social welfare policies we looked at with government-funded health care and tax cuts. But all four of those items, health care, tax cuts, abortion, same-sex marriage, really belong on our list. And the definition of benefits from having all these items on there. Okay, let's go back and review some of the problems that came up on this inventory. 3 common problems. 1, some properties refer to an entirely different concept. As we saw, income and age may be related to ideology or liberalism, conservatism, but they are different concepts. They're measurements of different things. Here's a rhetorical question to ask yourself. Is it possible to think about the essential properties of liberalism, conservatism, without also thinking about income or age? And the answer is yes. Ideology is separate. It'd be interesting to test some hypotheses about the relationship between income and age and liberalism, conservatism, but they are themselves different concepts, so we'll take them off the list. Here was the second problem we encountered. Some properties are themselves concepts, social justice, free market. A lot of conceptual work needs to be done there, and these are concepts themselves. Neither one is measurable. Both terms are themselves concepts, and we cannot use one concept to define another concept. Here's a question. If you're looking at something on your empirical inventory and you say to yourself, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it, then you need to dig deeper for concrete elements. This, of course, is a paraphrase of the infamous statement an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court made about pornography. In a pornography case, this justice said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, that's not good enough in terms of clarifying a concept. All right, here's our reduced inventory then. We got rid of other measures that don't belong or other words that don't belong, but we settled on these 4 traits: healthcare, tax cuts, abortion, and same-sex marriage. Now, you've probably seen this distinction before. I would say all these belong. You can probably think of other traits that also could go on our list. One could reasonably argue that all these traits belong in an empirical inventory of liberalism, conservatism. Here's the question. Can the attributes be grouped into different types? Are some items similar to each other and, as a group, different from the other items? We also touched on this. The economic or social welfare policy positions, healthcare and tax cuts, belong together, and the cultural or social questions about abortion and same-sex marriage belong together. You know, it doesn't offend logic to encounter a person who says that they are conservative, for example, on economic policies, but consider themselves quite liberal on cultural or social policies. That doesn't offend logic at all. In fact, that is the tip-off, that when you're dealing with a concept like this, liberalism, conservatism, you probably got a multidimensional concept. I call it a problem, but it's really not. It's a discovery you can make when you do this kind of conceptual work. A concept may be multidimensional. A conceptual dimension is defined by a set of concrete traits of similar type. Social welfare, that is to say economic policies, cultural, social policies. A multidimensional concept has two or more distinct groups of empirical characteristics. Liberalism, conservatism is certainly an example. Students sometimes say, well, liberals and conservatives also differ in international policies, foreign policy. That might be another dimension. Liberals and conservatives differ in their views of federal power versus state power. That could be another dimension. So it's very rich, this concept. Liberalism is a multidimensional concept. Economic liberalism, healthcare, taxes, and social liberalism, abortion, same-sex marriage. It's perfectly fine to have multidimensional concepts. You would measure each dimension separately. And as we pursue this example, we're going to define economic liberalism. Here's a template for writing a conceptual definition. The concept of blank, that just restates the concepts labeled, like the concept of economic liberalism, for example, is defined as the extent to which blank, those are the things you're studying, units of analysis, exhibit the characteristic of blank. That's where you put in the empirical property or the dimension that you've measured that's going to be the empirical expression of the concept. First blank restates the concept's label. The third blank specifies the property, all the work we've done so far, finding out what those properties are. The second blank, and we'll return to the second blank here in another slide. The second blank describes what are called the units of analysis. The people, countries, states, universities, counties, elections, whatever you're studying, to which the concept applies. The problem, or I guess an aspect of this, is that you can define the same concept with different units of analysis. I mean, we've been talking about liberalism, conservatism as attributes of people, but you can think of states. You can think of like some states are more liberal than other states. You can even think of some countries are more liberal than other countries. So we have to be clear about what units of analysis we're going to be measuring our concept with. The concept of economic liberalism, let's measure that dimension, is defined as the extent to which individuals, so in this telling, we're going to be measuring this on individual people using, say, survey data, exhibit the characteristic of supporting government-funded social welfare programs like healthcare.